Welcome to WizThrift, your one-stop shop for all things mystical, magical, and fantastical. Hello everybody, my name is Colton. I run WizThrift on YouTube and Instagram, and I am here with a new friend named Ethan. Ethan, could you give yourself a little introduction?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Ethan. I am with a small little startup called Lyres For Hire. I am a linguist and a grad student and a DM. I've been playing D&D and other tabletop RPGs for about 16 years, 17 years in October. I got started playing in 3.5 edition with one of the box sets that came out back then. So I got that as a birthday gift a long time ago, and I've been just enamored with the hobby ever since. I just love tabletop RPGs and all the improv and the art and the sort of just the excuse to sort of use my imagination. And yeah, so I've been completely sucked into the hobby ever since. So yeah, that's me. I don't know what else to say really, but
No, that's perfect. And that's Lyres For Hire. Lyres is like the instrument, not their liars.
yeah, because I kind of like see DMs as these kind of like modern day bards, sort of like spinning these little tales, and so I thought that was sort of a fun name for like a barding group.
No, I think that's really cool. When I first saw your page and your logo and everything, I was like, wow, this is really well done, and it's not only that, but you have fantastic content as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so it's almost been 17 years that you've been doing this. You started with 3.5 edition, and you said yourself you've been an unrepentant D&D addict. But what about the role-playing games really hooked you?
So I've always been like a huge fan of like just fantasy and sci-fi in general.
Yeah.
Like from like a very early age, like I was really sort of like drawn into the escapism that fantasy offered. And so I'm just like all of the way that things could be different, and the way that sort of like we were encouraged to sort of like use our imagination to imagine things being better or worse, or just simply fantastic in a number of ways. And so, yeah, so all my favorite books from early on were like, they had maps in the front that, because they weren't based on real places, and they had characters that really showed like heroism. And so like a lot of my heroes from a very early age were these fictional characters, but I've never felt that like these heroic fictional characters were unreal, because I think that like oftentimes what fiction does is show us true things in a sort of like an imaginary context. And so I've really been drawn to sort of like that kind of like idealism that the fantasy also offers, because I see myself as kind of an idealist also. And so I really like that. And also D&D is just such like, and all the tabletop RPGs, it's just I always joke that like D&D is basically like 30 hobbies like crunched together into one. And so it really allows you to sort of like develop yourself in a number of different directions, whether it's writing, or whether it's like drawing, or whether it's coming up with fantasy languages or maps, or like just character ideas, your social skills, and sort of just building confidence. I think that it can be such a fantastic hobby. No matter what you like to do, there's probably something for you in the hobby. And that sort of diversity of experience allows me to encounter like a diversity of people. And I think that also is really compelling about the hobby, is like I love meeting all different kinds of people.
Yeah. No, I love everything you said, and mainly because it's all true. And one thing you said before is dungeon masters or game masters, whatever you want to call them, are essentially modern day bards telling these stories. And you're right, we're kind of, if you're a dungeon master, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades to be good at it, because you have to learn so many different skills. And I really like what you said about 30 hobbies in one, because it's so fun. I don't really do pre-written adventures, mainly because I love making maps and doing all that stuff. So I 100% agree with everything you said. Yeah. Well, what's your favorite fantasy story? And then after that, what's your favorite sci-fi story?
Yeah, sure. It's hard to pick a favorite fantasy story, especially because, I don't know. I just feel like there's so many different things that I appreciate about fantasy, and different stories do the one note that I'm looking for in that moment really well. And so one of the things that was really influential, one of the sort of like the seminal works that was really influential on my particular DMing style and my particular perspective on fantasy
Mm-hmm.
was the story set in Allegacia by Christopher Paolini, the
Oh,
Inheritance series.
yeah.
Like I loved the way that Paolini sort of like incorporated language into his world building. Because from a
Mm-hmm.
very early age, I was also sort of interested in language and like the things that you can do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that Paolini portrayed the ancient language in his world, and how that language governed all that you could do with magic. Simple spells were just describing something about the world and being unable to lie. And magic was essentially whatever you said coming true, because you couldn't lie in the ancient language. I thought that was super compelling, and I loved the way that he did that. So that was definitely really influential for me. I like Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm.
That was super influential for me as a kid, because I sort of grew up with Harry, as it were. So like they came out when I was like around the age that Harry got into school, and sort of like as the books came out, I was also sort of maturing, and the later books are a little bit darker, and that sort of like it correlated really nicely with that sort of like teenage angst that many of us go through, and sort of like we start to appreciate the more like the darker tones
Yeah.
that stories might offer. And so I thought that was also really compelling. And so yeah, so I don't know, at Tolkien, like him being a philologist and all, like all of his stories, especially the Silmarillion. I love the story of Beren and Luthien. So that I really love a lot of the stuff by Tolkien also. So that's a really long answer for like my fantasy stuff. Sci-fi, I love reading like amateur science fiction. Like
Okay.
a lot of the stuff that just like amateur authors are publishing online and like in various like forums, just these like little short stories that people come up with and then sort of self-publish on these forums, especially the HFY genre, which stands for like humanity F yeah, which is
Okay.
this really niche genre of like speculative science fiction. 不觉得可以开门通吗? So like a cat's clawing on the door. Sorry, I want to like
No,
make it from like making all that noise. Like HFY is this speculative genre of science fiction where you are looking at all of the things that make humanity awesome or weird from the perspective of aliens who've never seen humans before.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's because the human body produces what's essentially like a drug, which is adrenaline, like a combat drug, or the way that humans are like super strong because of Earth's gravity.
Yeah.
Like humans are basically superheroes in these universes.
Yeah.
And I think it's like a really fun twist on humanism, which I find like I consider myself to be like a humanist. And so I love seeing like humans being portrayed in these like really awesome ways, or also the way that aliens can be terrified by the darkness that humans are also capable of.
Yeah.
So my favorite science fiction story is this long-running series called Death Worlders by a guy who goes by Hambone on Reddit, and whose real name I can't remember, Philip something. But so I love Death Worlders. It's such a cool universe that he's created.
That sounds amazing. And yeah, I love the idea. I've seen like maybe Reddit posts or just posts other places where other species looking in on us, we're like super terrifying, and the things that we do are really scary or just really strange. And I just think those are really funny. But that sounds really cool. I'll definitely have to look at that, because yeah, humans are awesome. We make a lot of mistakes. We do a lot of bad things, but humans are pretty cool. So you're a linguist. And you said you've been interested in language since you were a little kid. What about the language do you love so much, and how does that influence your being a dungeon master in your world building?
So I don't want to get too much into like the whole like I don't want to get too much into the whole like linguistic relativism debate because I'm not especially sold on a particular position on it. But I think that sort of like having access to language like allows you to experience things like in a slightly in a slightly sort of new way, and the things that you can do with language allow you to share your experience better with others. And like language is such a fundamental component of what it means to sort of like to be human. It's how we relate to each other in a lot of ways. It's something that humans have access to that a lot of other like species don't wield to the same extent that we do. And in many ways that allows our societies to do amazing things, and it allows the creation of fantastic arts. It allows the dissemination of this knowledge across cultures and across generations. And I think that's something really awesome. I think that's one of the things that I love about language. And I feel like by investigating it, I'm learning more about myself and about others. I'm learning more about like what it means to be human, to have that ability when I'm researching language. I think can be really exciting. And in many ways, like there are a few like open frontiers in science right now. Like outer space is like one of the big frontiers, but also like we still understand so little about how the mind works. After thousands of years of introspection, like we still know so little about it. And I think linguistics is like one of the really fun avenues that we can use to sort of like explore that body of open questions. And I think that's what I love about language in general. But the way that I use it to in my world building and in my DMing style is I try to make language that shows rather than tells what the characters know, or like what the characters idealize, in the form of like idioms, like that sort of like portrays how characters think about the world. So like if a character like is from a culture in which like there's like a lot of smithing, then like a dwarf might say like as a sort of like as a kind of invective, just like fire in my beard, like I'm so angry. So like that is, on one hand, it's like novel because it's not an expression that we like real world humans use, but it's also like relatable because like the analogy is really like palpable. Like we can imagine like what it's like to have a beard on fire and sort of like conflate that with like a more general experience of like being angry or shocked. Right. And so it kind of like it spans that gap of like what's relatable and like what's novel. And like so in a way we sort of like leverage our innate ability to understand language and depict another culture.
Wow, that's amazing. You have an amazing way with words, and obviously you're a linguist that's just spoken for, but I mean, it's really, really interesting listening to you explain these things. So how do you come up with your idioms? Because you've made a lot for almost every single race in the game. So how do you come up with those?
Yeah, so my general process for how this goes, and I was actually planning on making a video on this myself. So I'll give you the what do you call it, the spark notes on the topic. So when I'm coming up with like idioms for example dwarves, I want to get in my mind like what makes that culture or like species like unique, right? And so like I think about their physiology, I think about their environment, and then from there I start thinking about like some of the things I know about their established lore to see if anything sort of strikes me as interesting. And if not, then I sort of like start extrapolating from like what I know about the race and sort of like come up with some broad themes or values for like a culture. like if it's like a nomadic culture, then like they may not have like an especially strong like sense of like honoring the dead through burial. Like maybe they honor their dead in other ways because there's no one location where they're always at. They're always on the move. So they probably don't leave monuments or memorials for the dead. They instead memorialize their dead in a new way, like, or like by adopting them into some type of like, I don't know, collective like memory graveyard or something.
Okay.
Or like if they are like spending a lot of their time in some type of like arboreal environment, like climbing trees and whatnot, then they may think about the world in terms of like the analogy of climbing or the type of obstacles that resist you, like when you are living in a tree, for example, like, I don't know, like how branches can be slippery or rough, or and that can be an easy analogy for the type of I don't know, pitfalls that we're often sort of like subjected to, right? So like if we slip on a branch and we fall down, then we're gonna like, worst comes to worst, we're gonna hit our head on every branch going down. Right. And so like it's like a little bit of like a Murphy's Law kind of like idea, but like you might say like, oh, like to bounce on every branch is to sort of like to have everything going wrong at the same time, right? And so like I think about what type of analogies and metaphors a culture is going to be using, and that's how I come up with like the majority of my idioms. I don't want to be the person who only sort of like who takes English idioms or like other languages idioms and just like translates them into like some like fantasy Mad Lib, sort of like, oh, what's the matter? Like, beholder got your tongue? Like, that's like, in my opinion, that's like such like a low bar for like creating something new that like, I don't only want to do that. Like occasionally I'll stumble into something that fits too well to resist.
Yeah.
But I don't only want to do that. I want to like make new stuff, not just reskin. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I think it's really easy as a dungeon master when you're trying to prep for your world or your campaign, your session, to go for those low-hanging fruits. But it's also for me when I start my prep at the beginning of the week instead of like an hour before the game, I always feel much more satisfied with it. So that's really funny that you said that. But it's good that you have this mindset for it.
Yeah, so. I mean, on the topic of prep, if you allow me to like interject for a second, I have like this mindset where I envision two different types of preparation. You have this kind of like dedicated like prep where you just like sit down and you're like actively writing out the things that you're planning. But I also have this kind of like what I call like soft prep, which is like ideas that occur to me like in the spur of the moment when I'm riding the train or when I'm eating out at a restaurant or if I'm like waiting in line for a coffee. Like I'll just get these ideas that come to me and I'll like write them down like to use later. And I'm not planning them for like a specific scenario that I want to subject the players to, but I kind of like, I'm always aggregating like new ideas that I can then browse through during my hard prep time and sort of like, oh, you know what, this would go really well with this, and like this fits the sort of theme I'm going for here. And so like I prep less than I would need to because I have this body of notes that I've sort of developed in my so-called free time.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Do you feel like you're a very organized person, and so you try and plan a lot of things, or do you improvise at all? Or I guess every DM improvises, but what would you say your percentage is between prep and improvisation?
Yeah, so would I consider myself an organized person? I would say it really depends on like exactly what part of my life we're asking about, because like I can be kind of like a messy person in real life. Like I don't like organize things especially well like in my house, but some of the things that I care about like are organized like a lot better. So like I have like my books like meticulously organized by like topic and author, and that I think also sort of like is true for like my D&D stuff. So I almost always have the notes app open on my phone where I'm just like, I have like 24 folders of like various D&D topics that I'm like always throwing notes into. I'm like character ideas, adventure ideas, encounter ideas, like world building ideas, like publishable adventure ideas, or like all these different type of like things that I might want to sort of flesh out later, that just sort of like come to my like magic items. So I have like a lot of notes about those type of things, and I can usually find them pretty quickly because of this organized system that I use. And when it comes to Dnd Prep, I'm always sort of like using like the adage like just like lists over like prose. So like I tend to prep in lists a lot. So like I just like write bulleted lists, and I can improvise based on those.
Gotcha.
Like I prefer having like the structure ahead of time, but everything beyond that I can add on to later, as long as I know what the central tension is and like who the main characters or moving pieces are, like what the obstacles and objectives for the party are. Then I can build around it.
That's really cool. Yeah, I really enjoy setting up lists or just having a bunch of ideas and then finding ways to build them into the story with my players in mind. Mainly because I love to improvise, and it's really fun for me to come up with that thing on the spot and just build off of it. So I really like that.
As an example, I am really active on like D&D on Clubhouse. Clubhouse is this like social media platform app. I like to joke it's basically like, I don't know, like combining a walkie-talkie with like LinkedIn, because it's a bunch of people like looking like for jobs and stuff. But there's a really active D&D community on there, and we have so many like regular events. We're always like hosting like live games and stuff on there. I ran a game last week called Masters of Meowheim, which is like a little one-shot that I ran based on Mordheim. And so like the premise of the game was all of the players were role-playing these anthropomorphized versions of their pets to sort of like caricaturize like, I'm a dog, I'm always hungry, so I'm gonna try and stick all these things in my mouth like during the adventure. So they were basically just like role-playing as their pets for this little D&D one-shot that I moved up. And that was like mostly improv. Like the whole thing was like I wrote like about 4 notes down, like here's what they might see, and then from there I can just like I can wing it. And so that ended up being like a ton of fun. It was just like 2.5 hour one shot where the party started in a tavern, and they found out about this noise that was keeping everybody up, and the king cat, named after my cat Darcy, was like he wouldn't let anybody sleep because he couldn't sleep. So they had to figure out like, what's this noise coming from? So they had to go to this district that was overrun by rats and find out who is making all this noise. And eventually they found out that it was this mad German accented wiener dog named Dr. Frankenwisker, who was creating the world's first giant vacuum. And so all the pets banded together to engage in this climactic battle against a huge vacuum cleaner. And in the end, they defeated it with the magic, but the mad scientist escaped. And so that was like the one shot, and like a lot of it was improvised, from the NPCs they interacted with to how they traveled. They ended up like, how can we get there? So I'm like, well, you can walk there, or you can take a hot air balloon that's piloted by flying squirrels. And they're like, all right, we're gonna go hot air balloon. So they did that.
Of course.
And I'm like, how are we gonna like drag this out just a little bit, because we'll finish too fast if there's no conflict on the way there. And so I'm like, your balloon is attacked by hungry seagulls who want to eat all of your food while you're on the way there. And so it was a ton of fun.
That sounds amazing. Those for me are like the best sessions, when everybody's just riffing off each other and you're just like firing off ideas like crazy. Those are the best. They really are.
Quintessential D&D moments, like when you're role playing as a guinea pig, and your final attack against the giant vacuum is to rocket little poop pellets out of your butt at insane speeds to deal a critical hit. Like that is the D&D that people live for.
Yeah. No, I mean it is fun to do those serious moments, to have the drama and stuff, but I remember this past Saturday, my group, we were playing, and they were fighting some Skull Lords, and then the Skull Lord pulled up these like lesser Skull Lords. I was like, oh, they were joking like, oh, if it's a Skull Lord, it must be a Skull Duke or something. I was like, oh no, it's the Skull Manager. And then I was like, yeah, and they're under the Skull CEO, and this whole thing is run by the producer. And it was just like this running joke throughout the whole session, and yeah, it was just fun. It made it better to be a little silly. Yeah. Speaking of Clubhouse, do you listen to Venture Forth?
Yeah, I do. I consider myself good friends with a lot of the cast.
Oh, cool.
I talk to them all the time on there.
Nice. Yeah, because I've interviewed Cameron and Russell, and
great.
And I'm working. Ethan and I. Well, your name's Ethan as well, but the other Ethan, the Dungeon Master, we've been trying to get an interview for months, but like our schedules just don't line up. But yeah, so I love Venture Forth. It's super underrated. They're fantastic. They really are.
Yeah, I love all the world building that goes into it, and the voice acting is phenomenal, and I love the music that Shane makes.
Oh my gosh,
really
I want to talk to Shane just so I can ask him about his music, because it's amazing. It really is. And
yeah, he's great. Yeah, hop on Clubhouse sometime. Like he's usually around.
Yeah, no, I will. I definitely will, because yeah, they're all super cool people. It's awesome. Yeah. Well, my next question for you is about the Hoops system, HOOPS.
Yeah.
How did you come up with? Well, could you explain it and then tell me how you came up with it?
Yeah. So like for me personally, like I am always relying on these like little like mental tricks, these like mnemonic devices to sort of like help me keep track of like random things, because I tend to be sort of a forgetful person by nature. And so I was thinking of like I want a better way to plan adventures. I want like a system I can deploy that makes it easy to remember all the moving parts, so I don't forget them in the moment.
Yeah.
And it would be great if there was this like great little mnemonic that I could use to help me keep track of all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I thought like about like just sort of like the basic components of an adventure. It's very much like a kind of like adventure writing like 101, or like basic writing 101 type of stuff. So it's nothing like groundbreaking really. Just like you have something that gets the characters interested, like that's like your adventure hook, and you have something the characters want to do, that's like their objective. And from there I started like trying to play around with like letters, like acronyms, sort of like capture what else I knew I needed. Like there needs to be some type of reward, there needs to be potential to sort of like expand the scope of what you're doing, or like and there needs to be some type of like conflict, some type of like something to overcome to sort of present difficulty to the party. And when like suddenly my mind sort of latched onto this pun, which another thing that I tend to do is think about like puns.
Yeah.
And I'm like you've got adventurers who are always like going through hoops, like, and like your job as a DM is to like keep the adventurers jumping through hoops. And I'm like, that is the perfect acronym, because you can get your hooks, your obstacles, your objectives, your payoff, your spin-off, and that neatly encapsulates all the stuff you need to keep track of.
Yeah.
And as a linguist, a syntactician especially, I think about like recursion and structure a lot. And what I thought was really exciting about the idea of hoops is that you can nest one hoop inside another hoop, and that allows you to sort of like build an adventure into a campaign, because one of the obstacles in your like big hoop can be the objective of a smaller hoop, and so like you can like string them together, and once you complete one of your objectives, like you complete the adventure, all of the consequences of that adventure, the spin-off, like they can create new hooks for you. And so it scales both like linearly and hierarchically. And so I thought that was like such a cool unit to use to describe storytelling, and it actually ended up helping me remember how other people write adventures better too. Because like when I'm reading through like Rhyme of the Frost Maiden, trying to keep track of like all this stuff in this like 200-page book, I'm like, there's like too much stuff here to remember.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, what are the basics here? Like, what do I need to keep track of? Like, just like, what gets the party into it? Like, what do they want to do? Like, what is standing in their way? And like, so like, I sort of like, I look for the hoops in anything that I read now, and that helps me keep track of stuff better.
Dang, that's awesome. Because yeah, I saw it on your page, and because I'm always looking for ways to write better and more condensed one shots. Because one thing that I do, and I'm sure many other dungeon masters do, is they prepare too much, and you either have to skip things because you never get through it, and it makes it difficult to have a clean story that's just a one shot. And so I think it's a fantastic tool that I definitely am going to start using, because it's easy, and it's easy to remember too.
Yeah, I know it works for me. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's pretty basic. So I mean, I hope it works. I hope it works for others. But that's why I put it out there, because I really like to sort of like give back and sort of share the things that I find that work.
Yeah.
I mean, even if there's only one other person out there who benefits from it, like I consider that a win for me.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, hey, if even just one other person, it works for them as a dungeon master, it worked on their whole party, and then everybody's happy. So.
Yeah. Like we all have to learn. We all eventually learn these things through experience, and if there's a more memorable way of condensing that experience, then I mean, you'll still have to learn you have to sort of still learn kind of baptism by fire, but at least you'll have the tool to sort of structure sort of like to structure your experience when you want to recall it later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, we're coming up on time here, but one of my last questions is about linguistics. Have you ever made a language, or you ever like made your own words?
Oh, like conlangs and stuff?
Yeah.
Like constructed languages.
Mm-hmm.
I've dabbled in it in the past, especially like when I was like a lot younger, and sort of like all of my attempts then were like super kind of like simplistic, like just basically like little ciphers where you're like changing the English alphabet into like these weird characters, or like occasionally coming up with like new words. Like when I was dabbling in that, I never really got to such an advanced point where I was like actually sort of like creating like novel syntax, or like novel sort of like really consistent rules for the language, because like I didn't know that much about like how richly structured language is, like when I was a lot younger. And sort of like the more I do that, the more that like the coming up with like a language, like whatever like a language is like a pretty daunting task. And so for that reason, like I've never really felt that like I feel like that would fall into that category of like things that DMs do for fun that don't always end up being relevant in the game setting. And so for that reason, I've kind of stayed away from it. But I really admire people who is it, like Peterson, who comes up with like all the Na'vi language and like the Dothraki language, and the people who come up with like other sort of fictional languages for major franchises. I think that's like such a fascinating line of work, and like it's like kind of like they're kind of like my heroes for like getting paid to do that type of stuff. But I mean, I don't do that too much, because again, like I feel like it's a lot of work, and like I don't think that it would ultimately prove useful. Like there'd be some diminishing returns for sure.
No, I agree, and it's like you said, insanely difficult. It is just layers upon layers, and there's something about language that is just, even the most basic words and sentences, it's beautiful without even really having to try. And
when you look at people who've tried, like Tolkien, for example, who was super interested in sort of like in giving his languages a place to become more like organic, more than just like your basic like fictional language, a place where like the people who spoke them would grow and change and interact over time.
Yeah.
Like that enterprise took Tolkien decades, and sort of like he was essentially like world building like from the ground up. I guess like he incorporated like a lot of like folklore, like European folklore in his tales, but I mean still like what the body of work that he created was impressive. And honestly, I don't want to compete with Tolkien too much.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, last question. How many languages do you speak?
Yeah, good question. I always joke about this because like that's the first thing people always ask me.
Yeah.
When I say I'm a language, I'm always like, that's like asking like a vet how many pets they have.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, so I speak English and Spanish. I lived in Mexico City for a while.
Nice.
And I speak with a limited degree of competency Mandarin and Shanghainese.
Okay.
I've written some on Shanghainese, and I've dabbled in a few others, but like I wouldn't call myself like competent in them. I did a lot of research for a while on a language spoken in Nicaragua, which is like Mayagna. It's one of the Owa languages spoken down there, one of the Mesoamerican indigenous languages. I was part of a research group who was focusing on the cognitive semantics, and that was one of our like languages where we were working on that.
Yeah.
But I have forgotten most of what I knew about that.
Gotcha.
So basically, that all is to say, I'm good at like a couple languages, and the rest is just stuff I've dabbled in.
Gotcha. Yeah, I actually I do speak some Mandarin. I've lost some of it over the past couple of years, but I need to get back into it and start using it every day. But yeah.
Yeah, my wife is from Shanghai, and so that
cool.
Is a good excuse to practice.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, I have some friends where I'm at who speak it, but I'm kind of embarrassed because I've kind of let it go a bit. So
it goes.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Ethan, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about all this stuff. You have a vast knowledge of language and being a dungeon master, and yeah, you're awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think you're awesome. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak about stuff that I love. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. And hey, if you ever want to do it again or talk about other things, let me know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, hit me up wherever.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, Ethan,
yeah.
Have a great night, and I will talk to you later.
Yeah. All right. Take care, Colton. Thank you.
Bye.